St. Luke's Medical Center in Houston has temporarily closed its world-renowned heart transplant program. The decision follows an investigation by the Houston Chronicle and ProPublica revealing the departure of several top doctors and an unusual number of patient deaths in recent years. 2 more heart transplant patients died in May.
Washington state malpractice laws are among the most favorable to physicians. Geographic isolation stifles oversight and accountability. Less than 20% of doctors with 3 or more malpractice payouts from 1990 to 2005 were disciplined. Washington state ranks 8th worst in performing doctor disciplinary actions. U.S. lifespans rank 35th worldwide and are in decline. In Grants Pass, Oregon, I saw a dentist Smith in October 1988. I had lost a filling in tooth number 3. Dentist Smith was recommended by an office acquaintance. Smith wished to do a root canal, but I got him to try just replacing the filling. The temporary filling he installed fell out the next day. Thinking I had been duped, I got the name of a dentist Jones in Medford. After paying Dr. Jones $75, Jones told me I should return to Dr. Smith and that Dr. Smith would install the filling properly this time. No spoken or written truth ever came out of this. Years later, I learned that you can buy temporary filling material over the counter in drugstores. Only in healthcare can someone profit from self-sabotage. Dr. Smith's second filling fell out in just a year. Tooth number 3 never needed any root canal and is still alive and well 30 years later. Many of my friends have gone to Mexico for dental care, but I think very few would travel in the other direction. I have had dental assistants ask me if I ever missed even one day of flossing, as if I stole money from them. In early 1989, I changed jobs, but continued paying premiums to the First Far West Health Insurance Company. By April 1989, First Far West Health Insurance claimed bankruptcy, as embezzlement had claimed their assets. Still, they kept billing premiums. Except to the embezzlers, administrators, staff, and local politicians, this insurance was a rather poor investment. Insurance companies can arise from and dissolve into thin air. They are in business as soon as they take money from a client. Contrast this with Caterpillar. Caterpillar must first build real and useful products. When entering the market, Caterpillar spent money rather than taking money as insurance does. In February 1997, Reader's Digest published an article titled "How Honest Are Dentists?" by a William Eckenbarger. The author, after visiting 50 American dentists randomly selected nationwide, found astonishing variations in diagnoses. Treatment plans ranged from nothing to $30,1997. Greed was widespread and quality standards virtually non-existent. The mid-90s Reader's Digest article referenced a $1 million a year dental business model, the single white male playing the central role in profitability, doing nothing to prolong the life of American men. At the end, the author, William Eckenbarger, visited a dental school. The author stating, whose principal impetus should be to get things right rather than get rich. While the school visited by Mr. Eckenbarger seemed to diagnose correctly, my experience, even with dental schools, is astounding malfeasance and dishonesty. In November 1995, I went to the dental school at the Lake Washington Institute of Technology. An intoxicated dentist who tottered and repeatedly stabbed me with her probe diagnosed 13 cavities, only one of which was accurate. She seemed to wish to teach me a lesson for not making more regular visits to a dentist. Later that day, I spent 4 hours on the telephone, taking a ration of nonsense from a Washington State Dental Quality Assurance Commission. Their final edict was that I must file a complaint with the same school that had perpetrated the malfeasance. On December 2nd, 1996, I went to the University of Washington Dental School for severe pain in tooth number 30. For the root canal, the supervisor asked the student named Jones, 2, if he needed help, which he declined. Jones, 2, wore an expensive new suit, which must have put a student into some serious credit card debt. Just before he mutilated me, he quickly frisked me, which must have been a check to see if I could retaliate. Next, Jones, 2, drilled a hole out the side and base of my tooth and patched with temporary filling material, never completing the root canal. I was charged $96, given antibiotics and a pain prescription, never being told about the failed root canal nor the hole in the base of my largest tooth. This mutilation left my jaw prone to serious infection. When the Novocaine wore off, tremendous pain ensued, requiring a midnight visit to an emergency room pharmacy for pain pills. In the meantime, the antibiotics seemed to stabilize a possible life-threatening infection. 35 days later, the UW sent a letter saying they could not complete the permanent filling root canal for 12 months. 9 days later, I saw a dentist Smith 2 in Kennewick, Washington. The x-ray she showed me revealed the material leaking from the hole in my tooth. A few days later, when I presented the x-ray back at the UW Dental School, the staff claimed nothing was wrong. They demanded the name of a dentist who would say anything was wrong. I stated that they were each dentists and were surrounded by even more dentists. They stalled, played dumb, and tried to get me to leave. Two dental clinic instructors even pretended not to read dental x-rays. After more than 2 hours, they sent out the public relations woman with the sad face and condolences. She said they were too busy to see me that day, thinking this might get rid of me. I got louder and threatened to go public if they didn't deal with their mistake. Finally, the department head okayed an appointment for March 10th for repairs on the mutilated tooth. Eventually, the tooth had to be pulled by a Dr. Jones, 3, who refused to let me have the tooth. There was never any admission of wrongdoing. In the end, The principal impetus of even dental schools appears to make dentists rich rather than doing things right. There's a dozen things the defense might have done to swell O.J. Simpson's hand, but shrinking it would have been the real trick. Historically, the AMA and insurance industry have fought healthcare reform tooth and nail. Today, the insurance industry enjoys a $4 trillion war chest. Not only does this MetLife commercial encourage bad behavior by imitation, they implant fear, trying to coerce the public. For a routine insurance-covered dental exam, I saw
Jones,
Stephen Espley on November 7, 2003.
Jones, 2.
Had been recommended by a friend. I showed him the x-ray of the tooth that had been mutilated by the University of Washington. He wouldn't say anything except where did this happen and how long ago did this happen. He disclosed no information. On December 17, 2003, I saw Stephen
Jones,
Espley once more for a small filling in tooth number 17 and a dental cleaning. Unlike the case with
Jones,
Dentist Ray,
2.
I did not recover the temporary filling material when it fell out. Thus I was unaware that the tooth had been drilled and mutilated until the tooth number 17 had to be pulled in 2010. Still under partial local anesthesia,
Jones,
Espley's
2.
dental hygienist mutilated my tooth number 14 by carving a groove in its base with a file. She then broke the root on tooth number 30 by yanking on it with heavy dental tape, in the ruse that she was only flossing. Just a month earlier, a Washington ballot measure had failed, which would have allowed dental hygienists to practice independently from the tyranny of dentists. Although I voted for the hygienists, I was mutilated. My teeth, number 17, number 14, and number 30, are all molars. Molars are the most important teeth in the mouth. In less than an hour,
Jones,
Stephen
2.
Espley's dental practice mostly destroyed my ability to chew food. In the early 1990s, there was a time when the ADA website readily communicated simple plans for improved dental health. They recommended avoiding acidic foods. Acidic foods are typically sour, like soda pop, sour candies, and ketchup. The ADA recommended brushing with baking soda after toothpaste for acid neutralization. These early internet recommendations included the avoidance of hard foods such as corn nuts. Within a few years, the ADA replaced this information with subterfuge and misdirection. The ADA soon replaced yearly visits with a twice-yearly standard for patronage. For decades, the ADA refused to endorse the application of silver nitrate. So who am I? I'm 60 years old, having had a chance to see some things. I've performed many jobs, but was mostly trained as an analytical chemist. I met child victims of the Keystone chemical disaster. I found high levels of the carcinogen MTBE in Washington state gasoline supplies. As this cost money to the refineries and perhaps certain executives, there was an effort to get me fired. Within 6 months, a tainted sample shipment arrived, giving the refineries the chance to file litigation. My two immediate supervisors quickly sold me out, but a rep from our corporate headquarters uncovered the truth. I had recorded the unusual use of wide-mouthed, leaky, smelly, partly filled sample containers in the testing ledger, while the sample receiving ledger said nothing. In addition, the sample shipment had been lost in transit for 40 days, and the shipping container reeked of leaked gasoline. These corrupted samples were all a setup to get me fired. Powerful men litigate recklessly, while mutilated patients can't even mention a doctor's true name. Some years later, I proved that patterns of immunity to Mycoplasma ovipneumonia in bighorn sheepherds were normal, rather than paradoxical as had been published previously. This previous false claim suited a hunting club agenda to annihilate herds. Later, I showed that Mycoplasma ovipneumonia carriers could be identified remotely, reducing morbidity for this wild, excitable species. In spring 1979, I had an overnight hospital stay for a broken kneecap and femur in my right knee. 2 bone and 2 cartilage chunks were removed by a Dr. Smith. That night, a gaunt, glassy-eyed nurse stole or shared my pain medicine. Their narcotic count was 2 doses high. Later, I was diagnosed with hepatitis C. In the end, doctors had nothing to do with curing my hep C. Instead, they hindered treatment. In 1981, the jagged bone remnants from the 1979 knee fractures were smoothed by Dr. Earl Parrott. The procedure left a 5-inch scar. 40 years later, there remains a scab-like infection at the lower aspect of this scar. Parrott said it would go away. While in high school, a Dr. Soup recommended X-ray treatments for my cystic acne. I knew that X-rays ionized atoms, but was assured that the intensity and wavelength of these X-rays was safe. X-rays were the standard of care, as a large enough group of doctors still voted for the practice. I was too naive to know that this was due to business interests, incomplete return on capital investments. Within 20 years, I started developing basal cell skin cancers. Today, I treat these cancers with fluorouracil bought on the internet. The day after leaving the shipyard in 1963, the submarine U.S. Thresher sank in the Atlantic. One official remediation was to make many shipyard workers ride in the subs during maiden voyages. U.S. doctors, on the other hand, have absolutely no skin in the game. In recent times, U.S. healthcare executed a series of social engineering initiatives, including lobotomies, eugenics movements, untreated syphilis studies, experimentation on prisoners, and militant declarations like doctors should never be doubted or punished. There are those alive today with the sole agenda of keeping America the strongest on earth, who would advocate any means to this end. Rather early on, the Nazis had installed cyanide gas chambers in hospitals. Lobotomies were aimed at allegedly misbehaving stepchildren, like one truck driver interviewed on NPR. A Rosemary Kennedy, who had been placed in multiple convents by her parents, would lash out when they chided her for sneaking out at night. At the time, this could be passed as mental illness. With persuasion from Doctors Watts and Freeman, the 23-year-old sister of Robert, Edward, and John Kennedy was then lobotomized. Rosemary was left incontinent, never walking or speaking coherently again. 5% died from the lobotomy procedure. A personal, lobotomized acquaintance, Joe, was run down and killed in a crosswalk just a year after I first met him. What lobotomy patient is capable of suing their surgeon? With the agenda of fixing a disability rather than continuing to treat it, the United States performed the most lobotomies of any nation. On the other hand, the Soviet Union performed relatively few and was the first major country to outlaw the practice, although most would not want to live there as they did build the Iron Curtain. The economically frail former Soviet state of Cuba is renowned for its health care. While the U.S. virtually lacks any health tourism industry, Cuba, India, and others all have thriving health tourism industries. One reason for the poor quality of U.S. health care results from its multi-tiered structure. How does one ensure that those with the best insurance policies get superior treatment? The simplest solution is to just reduce the care for everyone else. What happens to minorities and the disabled is merely a muted version of the eugenics, prisoner, and lobotomy initiatives. This is politics, no accident, no bureaucratic anomaly. It is intentional. Taking politics all the way to the extreme, you get dozens of doctors and nurses, each killing tens or hundreds of patients. Recently, an egotistical Dr. Harold Shipman fatally poisoned as many as 300 patients. The ABC network, which airs many doctor reality shows, kept Harold Shipman out of their network news. A person might only have half of what a doctor thinks they deserve. So isn't it only fair that a doctor then take all of a patient's money, but only provide half treatment? This rationale rapidly leads to taking a patient's money without providing any practical or effective treatment. Greed plays a central role in the so-called American healthcare crisis. In 2004, the University of Washington paid $35 million in a Medicaid-Medicare fraud settlement, the largest such fine on record. Doctors and staff had been charging Medicare and Medicaid for work they had never performed. Doctors even charged for services they supposedly performed while on vacation. In addition to the government fines, the UW paid millions in legal fees. Unlike other universities that were fined after being caught by government auditors, the UW effectively concealed the fraud paper trail. Most records pertaining to this fraud were successfully altered or destroyed. The UW fraud was a crime of opportunity, only revealed by a single improbable whistleblower. And shortly before the whistleblower actions, signs had been appearing on lampposts around the UW campus. Although the government did eventually recover some of its money, the untreated and mistreated UW patients never received any compensation. While countries like Cuba and India have thriving medical tourism industries, the U.S. has nothing similar that we can sell to other countries. And it is only what we can sell to other countries that gives our dollar any value. Doctors rationalize their behaviors, claiming that anyone can become a doctor. And what if we all did become doctors? Clearly, we'd become a functionless society with worthless dollars. Long after realizations of widespread sexual abuse by Dr. Larry Nassar at MSU medical facilities, elite American gymnasts were still hounded by Michigan State University for these medical bills. With the U.S. insurance-based healthcare system, you pay non-specified retainer fees. You are not paying for actual services, but for the promise of some unspecified relationship. In the $35 million UW Medicare-Medicaid scandal, dozens of doctors were content to demand money even for doing nothing. And does any relationship ever actually exist when all the power is possessed by just one side, by the doctor? And any relationship involving lobotomies or dental mutilation demands the patient live a lie. Health workers become too accustomed to doing nothing. When any need arises for medical or dental services, the patient is bullied and placed on the defensive. Doctors even blame patients for causing antibiotic resistance. But with all their power and political influence, doctors have said nothing about the agriculture industry, which uses millions of tons of antibiotics. U.S. doctors themselves cause antibiotic resistance by constantly under- and overdosing. Doctors fail to dose patients using weight, while veterinarians do this correctly. No matter what a doctor does, insurance writes them a check. Not only did paramedics stand by as Eric Garner died, they stood in the way of bystanders who might have delivered resuscitation. On December 8, 2000, I saw a Dr. Gregory Farton for headaches and sinus pain at the Harborview Medical Clinic, an affiliate of the University of Washington. When I would put a Q-tip up my right nostril, pink coloration was seen. Dr. Farton seemed to wish to do nothing. At first, he wouldn't even look up my nose. And when finally he did, following many verbal requests, he didn't take any longer than a split second. This was clearly a sham, and Farton made no effort to hide this.
This is good. I don't think you want chronic sinusitis. I think I have chronic sinusitis anyway.
Farton said my headaches were likely neurological, and although Farton scheduled a CT scan, this was the same as his refusing treatment. Doctors seem willing to hurt patients just to show the doctor is right and the patient is wrong. Also, CT scans subject patients to considerable radiation. At the follow-up appointment, Farton claimed the CT scans showed absolutely nothing. Farton very briefly displayed the CT images, then tore them down and took off, like he needed to go get a fix. In actuality, the CT scans revealed multiple pathologies.
So we'd like to get a CAT scan of your sinuses just to make sure. How much does that cost? Well, it's not terribly expensive. It is something that gives us a lot of information.
Not until months later, when a Dr. Smith viewed the CT report, did I learn of the swollen mucus glands. For the headaches, the neurologist Smith prescribed nortriptyline, which can cause seizures. So a couple months later, while at a Mariners night game, the bright lights made me very dizzy. Soon my vision became blurred, and things looked very tall and skinny. For the rest of the game, I waited in the corridor by the concession stands, and I stopped nortriptyline. Swollen glands seem a likely source of pain, and if nothing else, sites for anaerobic infection. Doctors rarely get in trouble for non-treatment, unless there's nationwide video play. Later, other doctors who actually did look up my nose told me about my deviated septum, seen clearly imaged in Farton's CT scans. A couple years passed before I discovered that by putting a plug in one nostril with a plastic bulb, the headaches largely went away. Air no longer rushed past the irritated, bleeding tissues. The plug worked as well as narcotics. In June 1997, I called the University of Washington for concerns of skin cancers, which I thought were the basal cell or squamous cell type. They made me an appointment for July 11, 1997, with a Dr. Timothy Yoho, whom the UW claimed was competent to diagnose skin cancers. Yoho and his assistant scraped my lesions, making them bleed, looking for fungal hypha. Yoho said it looked like ringworm. He found no hypha, but he was sure I had nothing serious. I asked if he would take a biopsy, since the UW promised he was qualified to diagnose cancers. He finally admitted he wasn't qualified. Then I asked to see someone else in the office who could do a biopsy. I kept asking questions until he and his assistant practically ran from the room. I eventually paid half of Yoho's doctor bill, but I shouldn't have given them any encouragement for this. In 2004, these slow-growing cancers were finally treated, but it wasn't until they were respectably large and were bleeding constantly and had ruined several shirts and sheets. And there is always the possibility that they spread. By 2006, 17 lesions were excised. Subsequent topical chemo revealed hundreds of tiny lesions. As in the film The Conqueror Worm, reality is anything that doctors want to claim it is. After having to quit a light-duty job due to extreme knee pain, I was referred by a friend to a Dr. Rogue Blackbeard at the University of Washington. All I needed from Blackbeard was to document the disability so I could get services. Blackbeard threw a temper tantrum right outside the exam room. Blackbeard's assistant Dager also bullied me, trying to put words in my mouth. Dr. Dager kept trying to get me to say self-medication. Yes, I had been taking large doses of ibuprofen, but ibuprofen clearly causes no narcotic effects. Blackbeard and Dager were told of my childhood injury where I planted my left leg so that all my weight came down on the lateral side while my body twisted. The x-rays Blackbeard was given clearly showed the OCD lesion in the lateral femoral head and concave deformity in the lateral tibial plateau, both in the exact part of my knee causing the pain. A normal tibial plateau is nearly flat, bulging very slightly upwards, looking smooth and featureless by frontal X-ray. Mine showed downward curvature in both frontal and side views, appearing very rough and clearly damaged. As both bony injuries squared off face to face, even greater injury was proven. The truth was there in black and white. Blackbeard and Dager ignored the X-rays. But if dentists can recognize teeny tiny features in dental X-rays, surely doctors can spot larger features. The first X-ray image ever, made in 1895, was that of a human hand. This invention so revolutionized medicine that by 1896, Glasgow University had a medical X-ray department. In the end, Blackbeard played down the left knee X-rays and wrote a prescription for Voltaren, which I told him had never worked in the past. I told both doctors that I preferred ibuprofen. When I told Blackbeard and Dager they were practicing bad medicine, they stormed from the exam room. Their disability report was a fraud. Their self-medication claims assassinated my character. Also, they claimed that I had full function in my good knee, the right knee, even after they were told that this right knee prevented me from being able to run for the previous 13 years. This supposedly good right knee once had 4 chunks of broken kneecap, femur, and cartilage surgically removed. The miracle worker Blackbeard had transformed my left knee disability from a lifelong condition to something that would resolve in just 6 weeks. And once they have taken your money, you can't get help elsewhere. Among some people, if you realize no penalty, you feel no remorse. Might makes right. Blackbeard behaved as if I asked to borrow the very hand of God. At the same time, him knowing that many orthopedic injuries never heal. The healthcare industry realizes greater profits from malfeasance than from doing things right. This ensures repeat business. While most industries, like the auto industry, are destroyed by mistakes and recalls, U.S. healthcare continually benefits. Malfeasance creates an immediate demand for repeat business and multiplies profits. And it is the complete lack of oversight that drives these destructive, perverse economic incentives. As with dental care, there is virtually no oversight of medical care in Washington state. Prior to 2012, there was not even a direct means of filing written complaints. At the time, the Washington Medical Quality Assurance Commission, or WAQAC, had a website directing citizens to a 1-800 screening number.
Hello, you have reached the Department of Health Facilities and Services Licensing Complaint Hotline. To file a complaint with us, please leave your name, address, including zip code, and phone number, including area code. Please note that we do not have regulatory authority over billing issues.
And when complainants passed the first screening, they were robocalled with a message listing a toll number. The expensive toll number then permitted access to a chain of screeners, who might then finally allow a complaint. But the final complaint was heavily filtered and written in the hand of the screener. True quality assurance is taking aggressive actions to resolve problems, not the opposite. While the vast majority of healthcare complaints merit action, WAQAC is a complaint annihilation engine, only acting on 1/3 of 1% of complaints. and even then, penalties are minuscule. WACWAC tries to disguise how seldom they truly take actions. The true numbers of complaints are many times higher than what is disclosed in this deceptive statement from WACWAC. Here they list 1,476 complaints for 2015, but a second document shows cases 12,701 and 12,702, and it's not yet the end of the year. Cases and case numbers appearing on right of information disclosures appear nowhere within the official compilation. Without the Freedom of Information Act and more detailed records, I would have never discovered this subterfuge. Complainants are manipulated to feel like pariahs, so as not to follow up on their complaints, nor complain again in the future. 90% of written complaints pass into oblivion, not gaining any entry into public records or tallies. For these 90%, vague response letters are issued, not even stating why the complaint was rejected. Instead, WACWAC lists 5 imprecise catch-all causes for complaint rejection. Complainants are further deceived by believing they are at least included in the public record. 90% are not. Upon rejection of several written complaints, I requested WACWAC records and WACWAC's explanations for its decisions. Each month, I've received a short tally of heavily deleted partial records. After 18 months, I've received so few records that at the present rate, it will take 15 years for my request of just 3 years' records. WACWAC discloses nothing from the 90% of rejected complaints, mine included. So it's only the 10% of records, the ones that WACWAC wishes you to see, the public even gains even partial access to. WACWAC also refuses to release any of their decision letters. Almost nothing ever becomes any part of public record. A perfect recipe for lousy health care. Because complainants are required to give dates and office addresses, doctors know exactly who filed these complaints. While the same names are stricken from all public records so that abused patients may not contact one another for moral and political support. WACWAC deprives the public of the very information needed to repair this corruption, and at the same time encourages retribution from peeved doctors who already enjoy nearly absolute power. WACWAC holds no one accountable but the patient. Doctors can punish anyone they like for any reason they like. For complaining about doctors, or the healthcare industry, or the insurance industry, you might get mutilated. If persons become blacklisted in any one of 1,000 ways, they are subject to limitless retribution. WACWAC makes political mint pursuing substance abuse and sexual misconduct cases. Almost never does WACWAC address quality of care. From a business standpoint, acting upon quality of care issues damages reputation, only lessening the profitability of their business. There's big money in controlling and concealing the truth. Numerous complaints are filed against doctors for failure to treat or quality of care issues, but WACWAC refuses to act against non-treating providers, like the paramedics standing by as Eric Garner died. WACWAC typically answers quality of care issues using a no laws were broken response.
2 more heart transplant patients died in May. Mark Strassman is outside the hospital, which is now assessing what went wrong. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. Heart transplant patients are usually the sickest people in the hospital. But if you need a new one, this hospital has always been considered to have one of the world's best programs.
But some St. Luke's doctors were so outraged they left, including Deborah Myers, the former medical director of the St. Luke's Heart Failure Program. In a scathing letter to the hospital president, Myers called the program a debacle and blamed self-inflicted wounds, greed, careerism, corporate takeovers, appalling administrative oversight, and failure of leadership. Lawson calls Myers' letter disappointing.
The resigned medical director of the heart failure program at the prestigious Baylor St. Luke's Hospital in Houston wrote a scathing letter to the hospital president. She writes that at Baylor, medicine has become perverted into big business. Washington medical malpractice laws greatly favor doctors. The time I asked Dr. Blackbeard for a disability evaluation in early 1992, I had instead been bullied. Blackbeard wanted no part of a patient who would require multiple surgeries but had low-paying insurance. After being rejected by Dr. Blackbeard, I turned to lesser reputed doctors, and they became lesser in a hurry. In November 1992, I saw Dr. Biermeister, who was an exercise rehabilitation specialist at a prestigious University of Washington affiliated clinic. He prescribed a dyed X-ray so that the meniscus could be imaged. What the radiologist report clearly revealed was no meniscus injury, but rather the same elephant in the room seen in the 1991 X-rays given to Dr. Blackbeard. Perhaps because I maybe spoke disparagingly of his colleague Dr. Blackbeard, or because Dr. Biermeister could not perform surgery, or because I used a radiologist closer to my home than Biermeister's crony radiologist. With the 1992 radiologist report in hand, Dr. Biermeister reported I had absolutely no disability on the state disability evaluation form. For all their power and repute, doctors get rich by playing dumb. But see how far the average citizen gets by playing dumb in a court of law. Biermeister thought nothing of doing what a scientist would lose their license and reputation over, because doctors have no skin in the game. Next, I saw a Dr. Goldchest who didn't care to discuss X-rays either. He said what orthopedics do is to diagnose by surgical means, and the procedure costs about $5,000. And he was talking $1993. Goldchest wasn't satisfied with the $50 the state paid for him to complete the disability form. Like the $35 million University of Washington scandal, Goldchest wished to transform a $50 procedure into a $5,000 procedure, plus leaving the patient mutilated from surgery and possibly infected. Goldchest shot X-rays, but refused my requests for views that would have provided myself a legal recourse. Side by side, left and right leg views would have revealed the left bone injuries as even a 4-year-old could tell the difference. Goldchest bent over backward to conceal this information, as my right leg would have easily fit next to the left on his X-ray views. In March 1993, I saw a Dr. Earl Parrott, who had most recently performed surgery on my good right knee, but who had left me with a lifelong staph infection at the lower aspect of the incision. I emphasized my concerns for the bone defects in my left knee X-rays. Parrott stalled on the paperwork for months. It took multiple visits to Parrott's office, getting him to even complete the state disability form needed for funding surgery. But I did get to view his luxurious personal office. The surgery was finally performed on June 18, 1993. Following the surgery, I experienced continued knee pain. Parrott wanted to do further surgery, but I demanded an MRI. Rather than stalling for months, this time Parrott refused entirely. When I read the surgery report, I learned that Parrott had not performed the surgery I had requested. Parrott operated on the kneecap and not the bony defects. After making written claims in his surgical report that the lateral compartment was healthy and intact without defects or irregularities, Parrott knew that the MRI would reveal his lies. Parrott's office even lost my x-rays, making it more difficult getting help elsewhere. But I had copies. Parrott, Goldchest, and the other orthopedic doctors all played golf together. Transformed into some deranged faker, America had me living a lie. Deranged doctors, insane with greed, had me living their lie and imprisoned in their lie. As with the 1991 and 1992 x-rays, 2004 imagery revealed a massive bony defect with a cyst.
There's a cyst in there somewhere. Just wonder if I should trim. Let's have a basket.
Concurrent with a lateral tibial concave defect seen by X-ray, 2004 MRI imaging revealed cartilage thinning and degradation. Parrott would have clearly seen these giant wounds during the 1993 surgery if he in fact had looked. When Dr. Hook surgically accessed the OCD defect in 2004, he cut a separate portal from what he used to view the kneecap.
Bring this down and we'll see this area coming in through here in just a minute. That's right. I'll show you. We have to almost kind of bend down. It'll be a challenging one to see, and we might come from the other direction. Let's just do that. Let's come from the other direction. We'll take a look at that. We'll just switch the portals. Okay, some blood and cystic fluid there.
The 1991 and 1992 X-rays showed all the features of the 2004 images. Even though X-ray data from medical reports might be legally distinguished from mutilation, the patient is certified as healthy while remaining for all intents mutilated. These doctors used hit-and-run maneuvers, which they all made bank on. In the mid-90s, the fanatic golfers Goldchest and Parrott both retired with lucrative shoulder disability policies. The U.S. insurance industry quit writing such policies shortly thereafter. These doctors' morality seems to be that any deed you are not caught or punished for is 100% acceptable. Realize no penalty, feel no remorse. Not long before I spent the 1994 winter living out of my car, I visited two more useless orthopedic doctors named Lance Mayhem and James Mayhem II. One might think that the solution to medical malfeasance is to merely find care elsewhere. But having only walk-quack oversight, allowing all physicians to shake down their patients, you simply don't readily find care elsewhere. If the last doctor knows he got away with something, won't the next doctor just want to get away with the same? Not one of these 7 orthopedic specialists even commented on the broken kneecap and broken femur in my other leg. Lance Mayhem performed his medical evaluation with a set of golf clubs practically hanging from his shoulder. Dr. Mayhem, too, was mainly concerned whether I was a migrant or a bona fide Yakima Valley resident. Were I a Yakima resident, he would then perform a real evaluation and might have been willing to bestow his God-given surgical gifts. Having asked 6 doctors specifically for side-by-side, left and right knee x-rays, none would comply. Deprived of the simple truth that even a child would recognize in court, I lived out the doctor's lies until these were no longer of legal relevance. Compared with the mostly normal right knee, the left knee damage is clear. The upper damage grinds against the lower damage. Not until 2004 did a Dr. Sam Hook even somewhat reasonably document my knee disability and perform surgery to mitigate symptoms. But little could be done. On the femur, tiny amounts of material were removed and marrow blood released to try to cement loose materials together.
See the blood coming from those holes? That's what we want. So I just let the pressure down now. See the blood.
The cartilage on my tibia was a hybrid between cotton and an overcooked egg noodle, and not treated.
Some arthritic changes here on the tibia too. See how soft that cartilage is?
Then there were other health issues related to rehabilitation, and surgeons don't profit from rehab. After swimming 3 times weekly for months, I had ever greater shoulder pain. The hamstring in my good leg became painful, trying to compensate for the bad leg. Hook said to stretch, stretch, stretch. But Surgeon Hook was dead wrong. Proper medication and careful exercise were correct. Overstretching harms hamstrings. Hook didn't wish to treat anything other than the left knee. He said, "What do you want? I fixed your knee." Sam Hook became argumentative and verbally abusive, continually misrepresenting what he had said and what I said. Obviously, he knew he had done the minimal work to repair my left knee. Hook had previously suggested a cadaver bone grafting procedure if his first surgery failed, but in the end he chose politics.
We just closed your claim. What's going on?
Climbing stairs with one leg, and it's really kind of awkward.
Why are you climbing stairs with one leg?
Well, because this thing's real sharp on the end, and I can't call the weight on it yet.
I don't understand that. What do you mean?
You got a pin the lateral side when I bear down on it, or get enough force on it.
I'm giving you my opinion. It's an opinion. That's all it is. That's all it is.
I don't use opinion. I mean, I'm ashamed to use opinion and give you your word.
Not at all. That's what we do.
You should be.
A lot of this has been science, so good luck, okay?
Why isn't it science?
Well, isn't it? So there's a lot of things that are based on what we do and what our beliefs are and all that, so.
Hook was even willing to make implications that I was some kind of drug addict when I requested muscle relaxants. Perhaps having steroid rage, it was Hook who appeared drugged. He had gained 20 pounds since my last visit. The concocted opioid crisis is nothing but doctors trying to put a positive spin on a politicized treatment agenda. Mutilated patients often need opioids. Doctors need power and control. Recently, the soaring number of joint replacements has created a strong opioid demand, as joint replacements all eventually fail. In the end, Hook assaulted me twice, once rapidly bending my leg, causing pain and possibly function loss, then rushing toward me in a threatening manner. Medicine is one of the few vocations allowing practitioners to profit from sabotaging their own work. You greatly improve the outcome for your loved one by having a presence in the waiting room. The odds get 3 times better. Are doctors more likely to experiment and hone their craft with the waiting room empty or occupied? On the sole occasion that I went alone into an ER, they tortured me. To make them stop, I had to call 911 on my cell phone. Around me, the patients with family present were all well treated. After Hook, a Dr. Carson attempted bone grafts to my femur. The supporting bone was too rotten to take grafts well, and I ended up with 2 more pits in my knee from the donor tissue sites. Dr. Carson did repair a meniscus cut, likely left by Dr. Hook.
Make sure I'm not getting down in that meniscus there. There, so now I can see that pretty well.
Having previously had uneventful spinal anesthesia, Carson's anesthesiologist kept harassing me throughout the entire procedure about my choice for spinal anesthesia. He must have made far more money from general anesthesia. Had there been audio recording, I think he would have kept quiet. He kept wanting to give me narcotics and kept giving me crap that he'd probably need to use a catheter. When my blood oxygen went slightly low from harassment, the cold room, and the cold IV drip, I was scolded. Being the sole sensible and responsible person, I requested a blanket. Patients commonly need blankets during surgery. Doctors throw tantrums because they can.
If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor under the reform proposals that we put forward. If you like your private health insurance plan, you can keep it.
If you like the plan you have, you can keep it. If you like the doctor you have, you can keep your doctor too.
Without strong cause for action, deeds are avoided. And although Obama did take action in 2008, he did nothing to fix a largely dysfunctional healthcare industry. Obama's solution was to double down, to inject more money into the present healthcare system by forcing more people to pay into it. Obama gave a corrupt health industry greater power and credibility while simultaneously giving them even less accountability. What if, instead, Obama had faced the simplest of truths, that the healthcare industry was responsible for high medical prices, not the patient. Rather, Obama proposed a, quote, Affordable Care Act, sanctioning Michelle's cronies, the insurance industry. Americans mostly hated his plan. Americans wanted a single-payer system. But this was thwarted more than anyone else by a Joe Lieberman, who profited from the status quo. A close friend of Trump, one is tempted to put Joe Lieberman in the role of a ruthless dictator. But all Republicans voted against health reform. The U.S. treats access to adequate modern health care as the pinnacle achievement of our society, while China did the opposite. 35 years ago, China had the ability to safely harvest and transplant human organs, then invested this revenue creating a technological behemoth. Unfortunately, often prisoner organ donors were used. Former Washington Governor and Attorney General Christine Gregoire is a fanatic advocate for the healthcare lobby. As Attorney General, Gregoire quickly dismissed healthcare complaints. As a reply to my written complaint, Gregoire generously gave me the sole option of paying to fix the malfeasance myself, rather than her doing what she was paid to do. All I need do was get one of my team of attorneys on the phone. Without running in a blue state and thousands of voters holding their noses while punching themselves in the face, Gregoire would never have been elected as governor.
I knew health care reform was coming. I mean, you can hear it out there. So
You talked to Barack Obama about it during the primary campaign.
I did. At length.
At length. Uh-huh.
We were front and center in the middle of the debate because of things that we'd already done. We have a group health cooperative back in our home state that became a very significant issue to be discussed in Congress. And I became a big advocate, but I also said if you do not do the mandate, it won't work. Trust us. So off we went. So along comes the ACA, and we had really no partisan divide, because we had already set the train in motion. We were already making reform work. This was just going to allow us to do some more than what we'd already been able to do.
But you also
Gregoire stated she never liked the GAU assistance program for the disabled, saying, "Why provide aid for a patient when the same patient can be cured?" Both Gregoire and Joe Kennedy were eager to take advice from self-serving doctors. Gregoire's legacy is a broken judicial system, thousands of mutilated citizens, a new means of profiting from cadavers, and for some, greater access to cosmetic surgery. Today, Gregoire enjoys a lucrative position in the health industry.
It blamed administrators and chronic program issues for David Quiton's death.
People deserve the truth. They need the truth. Yes, it's hard to cope with the truth, but that's better than finding out everything was a lie.
So how do we fix the problem? To fix the problem, we need the truth. Medical quality assurance programs scream for immediate overhaul. Without accountability, you don't have health care. Like the vast majority of the world, the U.S. needs to let patients get their medications over the counter. Also, X-rays and most blood testing should be directly accessible. No one should ever need to deal with sociopaths for basic health care. The public desperately needs access to the National Practitioner Data Bank, describing incidents of malpractice. The Internet could be a godsend. The internet might forever change the doctor-patient relationship or fall to corruption. And why not publicly fund a competitor to the AMA, like maybe a USMA? Isn't competition essential for real and effective capitalism? More surveillance cameras should help reduce white-collar crimes. And the biggie, the most obvious solution favored by most Americans, is a single-payer system. Just remove the perverse incentives causing lousy health care. Is it really even health care when practitioners do not care? Although I wrote dozens of letters, one 40 pages long, doing my diligence to improve health care, lousy health care is still the demon that will not die. In an attempt to get a disabled parking permit, I saw a nurse practitioner plunder. She wanted x-rays to prove that my MRI and surgery video belonged to myself, rather than being copied off the internet. The x-rays were taken by Dr. Woodleg at Yakima Valley Imaging. Woodleg was first instructed to x-ray the wrong leg. Plunder's immense ego decreed that I was illegitimate, and Woodleg played along. For my knee, Woodleg didn't even bother to reposition the x-ray source. Most selfies are better executed. Stephen Woodleg reported no pathology to Plunder. So next, Plunder cancels my follow-up appointment and likely also spreading office gossip. When I finally did get to plead the truth at a follow-up appointment, faced with only nonsense, I could only walk out in the middle. You wanted me to get those x-rays to prove the MRI was my MRI.
No, there's nothing going on your leg from the x-ray.
Oh, here's the x-ray. Can we look at the x-ray for a second?
That's from a long time ago. It would have improved by now.
No. MRI shows a lot. X-ray can show.
When did you take that MRI?
Oh, 10 years ago.
Exactly. It's improved.
No. Arthritic X-rays and MRIs do not get better. And although Woodleg's X-rays clearly linked the surgery video and MRI to myself, no disability parking permit was obtained. So in the end, no health care was obtained, and it was Plunder billing Medicare that was illegitimate. Complaining to Waquack yielded a bold response, that no laws were broken, even though Stephen Woodleg had tried to extort money for additional MRI imaging, clearly illegal. And Waquack told Plunder she was free to discriminate any time against anyone she wished. Illegal. Laws were broken. With absolute power, you have absolute ego. Even after all she had done to me, Plunder still left me a phone message telling me to go fuck off. Without motivation, things don't get done. And I needed quite a push to relive events and complete this documentary. I have a close friend who is a bit too tolerant even for my own tastes. During superficial surgery at the University of Washington in Seattle, a kiwi-sized chunk of her brain was destroyed. Doctors had attempted general anesthesia without blood pressure or BIS feedback, the most accurate measures of anesthesia depth. Even worse, this was done during IV drip anesthesia, where resuscitation is far slower than with gases. The most highly paid doctors are anesthesiologists. Whether working as an anesthesiologist, or flying a plane, or driving a car, you must keep your eyes open and pay attention to what you are doing. Because everyone responds differently to drugs, anesthesiologists must monitor drug effects on every patient. Otherwise, proper drug dosing is impossible. For thousands of years, it has been known that individuals respond much differently to alcohol. Lethal dose 50 is the drug dose lethal to half of a population. For alcohol, lethal dose 50 is 5 grams of alcohol per kilogram of patient. Drug toxicities can only be known statistically. Some will succumb to a fraction of the lethal dose 50, while others will tolerate many times the lethal dose 50. Rare individuals can drink and barely get drunk. To compensate for the varying effects of drugs on different patients, both state and federal law dictate that blood pressure must be monitored at a minimum once every 5 minutes. During my friend's surgery, the UW failed to properly monitor blood pressure for the first 74 minutes. Prior to 1903, safe general anesthesia was not possible, as blood pressure could not be accurately measured. As such, Civil War surgeons were not insane. They did surgery quickly without general anesthesia. So to make things right, the perpetrators rushed to the intensive care unit before it was even clear whether the patient would survive, implanting an important message into her damaged but attempting to recover brain. It could not be avoided. It was just one of those things. 2 weeks before the patient could even swallow soft foods or barely speak intelligibly, her damaged brain was implanted with their doctrine. According to an anesthesia article by the Wall Street Journal, the University of Washington conducted the most comprehensive computer study ever, allowing anesthesiologists to duck responsibility. Clearly, it was the unconscious patient's fault for overreacting to an intravenous injected super stimulant. Then, to keep their victim on the defensive and in their control, the UW aggressively pursued billing demands over the better part of a year, just like Michigan State University did with the raped Olympic gymnasts. This was not one of those things. It was action-reaction. R and Char kept trying to say that their patient had had a stroke from out of the blue. No, it was cerebral hemorrhage caused by drug overdose. It was action-reaction. Just as striking someone's head with a bat starts cerebral hemorrhage. During superficial lip surgery, a stable anesthesia level was never attained. Not prior to surgery, not even 65 minutes past the start of surgery. Over a 50-minute period, a constant anesthesia overdose was administered. Anesthesia overdose causes diffuse brain damage due to a lack of blood flow, blood pressure being too low to push blood through the vessels. Then next, an overdose of stimulant was used for emergency resuscitation. Hypertension, cerebral bleeding, and greater brain tissue destruction resulted. With actual blood pressures pulsing radically between 100 and greater than 250 millimeters, with each and every beat of the heart and for several minutes, you had ideal conditions for cerebral hemorrhage. The anesthesiologist never even acted to pause the procedure and assess for brain hemorrhage. Drug toxicity being the same as the effects of high doses, ephedrine toxicity presents as brain hemorrhaging, particularly with intravenous injections. And when used with sevoflurane, ephedrine is many times more deadly. This toxic effect was further aggravated by high phenylephrine dosing. Crystal meth is made from ephedrine. Even meth addicts are afraid to inject the stuff, and if they do, they know to never go and lie down. So my friend received the maximum allowable 5 milligrams per milliliter dose of ephedrine. And if the doctor grew annoyed and injected this too quickly, this alone would have been devastating. But the UW refuses quality assurance. They release no surgery video or audio, no accounting of drug vials administered, and no doctor drug testing results. The heavily redacted official UW medical record omitted vital sign data entirely, instead showing tiny, incomprehensible graphs. So then, it took 6 more months to obtain the less redacted raw data set, and even this data was easily falsified. This data was stored in Microsoft Excel format, which even a 3-year-old could change. Hospitals truly concerned about quality of care, or the slightest concerned about patient well-being, do not issue heavily redacted medical reports. When asked about the timing of drug administrations, the UW Anesthesiology Department Head, Dr. Alan Artru, said the timings were only approximate and might have been off by many minutes in either direction. Artru didn't know anything about which anesthesia machine or blood pressure cuff was used. In short, he cared nothing about what his staff did or anything about their patients. Patients, apparently, being something less than human. Those who are above the law never get held responsible. Artru worked hard playing dumb and concealing the truth. So in the end, almost nothing is known about which drugs were given and when, or whether a drug dose was even reported at all. They might as well have said in their official UW medical report, "We drugged okay, we drugged them good, we drugged okay, we drugged okay." Doctors will always claim to only treat patients in good faith. Yet the medical record reports only the trivial, saying nothing of the life-threatening low blood pressure emergency, nor the succeeding life-threatening high blood pressure emergency. Hospitals that truly care anything about their patients will admit to medical emergencies. Lacking a proper medical history, how could subsequent doctors provide proper care? The outcome was nearly fatal brain swelling, yet a third unreported medical emergency. Before giving any dose of a powerful stimulant directly into the bloodstream, Any anesthesiologist must be thinking, I better be careful not to overdo this. I must avoid cerebral hemorrhage. Instead, it was nearly 3 hours before the University of Washington acknowledged and started to treat this brain hemorrhage.
A brain hemorrhage is a life-threatening medical condition, and it is crucial to receive medical treatment right away.
Let alone CAT scan imaging, they didn't even pause the procedure for EEG or BIS. Earlier in the procedure, BIS had been disconnected for convenience. Since excess anesthesia causes brain damage from oxygen deprivation, and hypertension will completely destroy chunks of the brain, or often kill, the University of Washington must have expected some brain damage during this surgery, but just hoped it wouldn't be too noticeable. But by working to conceal mistakes, they willingly inflicted ever greater injury. Each of 3 different hemorrhage treatments would have all improved the outcome. And if the brain hemorrhage had been realized and the procedure halted, not one person in the operating room would have been paid by insurance. And furthermore, the University of Washington would have had no leverage against the patient for unpaid medical bills. Although true, having a family presence in the waiting room does decrease bad outcomes by 3-fold, you can still not blame anyone but the doctor when there's goofing off or politicking. How dare they dishonor a God? She would show them, she would slay, then resurrect. Video recording of surgeries, rather than worshipers in the waiting room, would best put an end to politics. And given the 3 times worse outcomes, should it even be legal to tell doctors who waits outside of the surgery? Doctors too seldom have to face up to the truth, because doctors very rarely testify against doctors. Instead, they gang up on patients. So why face up to the truth when you know your colleagues are more than eager to support your lies? Dozens of UW records even call this a post-operative cerebral hemorrhage. But there was absolutely no evidence of this. There was never any repeat of any hypertension. Furthermore, a post-operative hemorrhage would have had little or no brain damage. Take Montel Williams, who got treatment within a half hour of his brain hemorrhage. Montel had a great outcome. Montel was not left lying flat for 3 hours so brain tissue could swell and die. While lifting heavy weights during an intense workout, Montel Williams burst a vessel near the top of his brain.
Don't go to sleep and don't lay down.
So what'd you do?
And I mean, literally, I could barely move. I stood up and grabbed onto the walls.
This image showing the peach-sized bleeding in his brain.
Then there was Dr. Brianna Sparrow, who gladly sold herself to support Docs R and Char. Dr. Sparrow states the patient's blood pressure appeared to briefly be in excess of 180. But the physiology of the patient and apparatus used indicated blood pressures in excess of 250. That could have been much higher. Even veterinarians know this. Oscillometric blood pressure monitors are more commonly known as cuff-type blood pressure monitors. Cuff blood pressures are inferred from oscillation envelopes rather than directly measured. These inferences cheat toward normal blood pressure, 120/80. Such systems are termed undersensitized or biased. So for low blood pressures, these cuffs report falsely high, and for high blood pressures, these cuffs report falsely low, cheating toward 120/80. But for women, the cuff errors are greatest. For people with large arteries, the cuffs work best. But for thin-armed women with small arteries, systolic errors may be extreme. When systolic and diastolic pressures vary markedly, the oscillation envelope is greatly stretched and drawn thin. These extreme conditions occurred within my friend when heavily dosed with powerful sedatives and then powerful stimulants. At best, small female arteries can only produce a weak oscillometric signal. Thus, the signal-to-noise ratio is insufficient to correctly define the oscillation envelope. Measurement noise pinches off the ends of this poorly defined oscillation envelope, causing grossly low systolic readings. Even veterinarians know this. No algorithms or signal processing can possibly repair a situation where there is insufficient signal compared to background noise. Any forthcoming anesthesiologist could write a booklet on how these cuffs operate, rather than just playing dumb. It is pressure differential that explodes buildings during a tornado, squishes divers, and ruptures arteries. These cuff systems cannot see spikes at all, but rather average pressures over many heartbeats. When systolic and diastolic pressures vary greatly, the system averages pressures over dozens of heartbeats, causing even greater inaccuracy, as every heartbeat produces a somewhat different blood pressure. Dr. Sparrow further states that due to the patient's young age, vascular malformation possibly caused the brain hemorrhage. While this might be true for children, clearly a 46-year-old is no child. It is just back to the old game of blaming the patient, even when drugged and unconscious. Dr. Sparrow and all those jumping on the bandwagon reporting a post-surgery brain hemorrhage were willing to terrorize the patient and her family, letting them think a second deadly hemorrhage could happen at any time. One even told her she needed to get her children checked. The most extreme blood pressure spikes that this 46-year-old patient ever realized came on December 16, 2016, as a direct result of an intravenous ephedrine injection, while at the same time being heavily doped with phenylephrine, sevoflurane, fentanyl, and other powerful capillary dilating narcotics. Capillary dilation causes blood pressure to crash between each and every heart pressure pulse.
But that's better than finding out everything was a lie.
This hemorrhage in the base of the brain, nearest the heart, very strongly suggests just one thing: an acute intravenous drug overdose. These extreme spiking blood pressures drop quickly within the plumbing, moving up through the brain. Multiple findings ruled out aneurysm and vascular malformation. Jones, Taylor's falsehoods were soon revealed as even 2 UW doctors admitted that hypertension caused the brain hemorrhage. Yet it was Jones, Taylor's falsehoods that the UW stuck at the front of their phony baloney official medical report. So even though blood pressure soared in excess of 250 millimeters, blood pressure fell all the way back to 100 millimeters every time the heart filled and prepared to beat once more. These dramatic pressures caused a hammering effect on the vessels, much like what plumbers refer to as a water hammer. Vessels flexed violently wherever they curved or bent. Bending and flexing materials break. So within the basal ganglia, the part of the brain nearest the heart and subject to the highest pressures, cerebral hemorrhage resulted. Then, just 20 minutes following the 2 emergencies, like so many doctors before her had done, Dr. R abandons her patient mid-procedure, all the while her patient's brain swelling and tissues dying. Then, the University of Washington medical records were falsified or at least doctored. The official version of the UW medical report shows a 0.4% dose of sevoflurane. Sevoflurane multiplies the toxicity of ephedrine. A more detailed, most difficult to obtain, raw data set shows that a 4.3 times higher dose of sevoflurane was actually truthfully given compared to what the redacted official UW medical report states. It is peak sevoflurane dosing that sets blood plasma levels, as sevoflurane lingers many days in the body. While sevoflurane may be rapidly expelled from the lungs, the sevoflurane blood plasma half-life lasts for many days. The uncontrolled partial emergence from general anesthesia causes a dangerous arousal, producing life-threatening blood pressure spikes. This patient required 2 quick emergency doses of propofol to put her back down. An average blood pressure value is reported without any diastolic or systolic readings, which should be impossible unless the data was doctored. The software rejects such data, then immediately remeasures. The record falsely claims unable to use BIS monitoring because interferes with surgical field. Electric fields interfere with the high impedance BIS inputs, not the opposite. BIS wasn't used because the anesthesiologist was in a hurry or maybe playing games. The UW refuses to release any records of their internal investigation, even to the patient, for this very rare, one-time in 40,000 incident, leaving the UW able to alter and falsify their internal investigation up until the time it is finally made public. The impact-sensitive blood pressure cuff had been installed directly in the surgeon's path, being repeatedly bumped. The anesthesiologist determined the placement of the blood pressure cuff. The UW medical record reports moving the blood pressure cuff from the wrist to the ankle at 4:14 p.m., fully 74 minutes into the procedure. Fitting the cuff to the ankle would have required a larger cuff, but simply moving the cuff, as the report states, would have led to major errors. The report clearly states that the cuff was moved. Because the cuff gave consistent readings only when on the ankle, It must have fit the ankle and been very loose on the wrist. Loose cuffs being highly sensitive to impact. Only after the near-death vital sign crash was the cuff moved so that it could produce useful readings. Early on, the cuff read nonsense. Only after reinstallation did the cuff read like connecting the dots. Early on, the cuff was set to read once every 90 seconds, but kept returning grossly corrupt values. More than half of the time, the readings were discarded as corrupt. Thus the erratic interval between readings. An alarm would have sounded with each rejected reading. Many of the accepted readings were corrupt in reading falsely high, as the cuff deflation cycle ended prematurely. The cuff thought the impacts from the surgeon were blood pressure pulses from within the patient. Nurses always tell you to hold still when reading your blood pressure.
Okay, let's start the measurement. Try to remain still and calm throughout the measurement. If you move or get excited, your results won't be accurate.
After inflation is finished, you'll feel a decrease in pressure. However, keep still until the display shows the final results, because the unit is still measuring your blood pressure while it deflates the cuff.
Press the power button. Do not move and remain quiet during the process.
Good morning.
Good morning. Heart transplant patients are usually the sickest people in the hospital.
St. Luke's one-year survival rate in the year and a half prior was 84.2%, below the national average of more than 90%. The hospital made changes and says its survival rate jumped to about 94% by 2017.
Having high standards, even for deathly ill patients, Baylor University discontinued a heart transplant program when survival rates fell below 80%. Having very low standards, even with a healthy young patient, the University of Washington ignored a nearly fatal, one time in 40,000, medication-induced intraparenchymal hemorrhage. Although a poorly installed blood pressure cuff and failure to monitor patient vital signs triggered this series of events, a desire to conceal the truth multiplied the fallout. And if you're not somebody important with attorneys at the beck and call, in the United States this treatment is typical. And for all this malevolence, the healthcare industry was rewarded with 100 times greater earnings from my mutilated friend. The uniquely American eugenics lobotomy institutions endure. Seattle-based Amazon and Microsoft both extol the virtues of artificial intelligence, the emerging weapon of discrimination. Within 6 months of my requesting WAQAC to disclose their records, they had mutilated my close friend. This certainly had the appearance of hit listing blacklisting.